Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Niagara Falls Review. Following that at midnight, we have the USA Today Weekend Edition rebroadcast from Friday's broadcast. Stay with us for these readings and more throughout the rest of your evening. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Jeff Shapiro, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from Current Issues, actually, the December 23rd issue of the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. So, a matter of time before it happened. A lengthy armed standoff was scary for Welland neighbors. Living near the former church property owned by Daniel Tronco hasn't been easy for Jesse Doucette and his girlfriend Alyssa Giroux. A tense, nearly 24-hour standoff that ended early Saturday morning with the arrest of a 59-year-old Welland man is being described as scary and only a matter of time before it happened by the couple. Doucette and Giroux, who have lived in their home at the corner of First Street and Plymouth Road for 10 years, likened the standoff that started Friday morning to a scene from the Grand Theft Auto video game series. Police vehicles, including tactical officers from various police services, converged on 114 2nd Street, a former Hungarian Presbyterian church, on Friday, driving over curbs and flattening recycling bins and garbage cans, shattering them and scattering debris, they said. We had a perfect inline view to watch the whole thing. It was like 4 stars on Grand Theft Auto, the drones, the helicopters, said Doucette. We had the SWAT vehicle lined up perfectly with our house, and the armor was down. And they're battering rams and all of that, and I'm looking out there just trying to check out what they're going to do, and they had their guns pointed. Doucette acknowledged that he was told to shelter in place within his home, but he was curious and peeked through windows at the scene unfolding outside. To be honest, my nose was right out the window. I wasn't supposed to, but I was looking, he said. The incident began after Niagara Regional Police officers arrived to assist Welland bylaw officers with a fence issue on the property. Gunfire rang out, resulting in a Niagara Regional Police officer being shot. She was treated for her injuries and released from hospital. A news release late Saturday from Ontario Special Investigations Unit said that Tronco retreated into his home after shooting at police, leading to the standoff. The SIU invoked its mandate after the officer was shot, and police said that they could provide no further information regarding the circumstances of the incident. The lockdown covered Welland Hospital, St. Mary Catholic Elementary, and Plymouth Public Schools, and Plymouth Cottage retirement residents. In a news release Saturday, police said Tronco surrendered and was arrested by emergency task unit officers at about 7:25 a.m., nearly 24 hours after the incident began. Tronco was suffering from a gunshot wound which happened during an exchange of fire with police Friday morning. He was transported to an out-of-region hospital by Niagara Emergency Medical Services and is listed in stable condition. A property search confirmed the former church is owned by Tronco, who purchased it for $210,000 on December 21, 2012. Neighbors said that they've had no meaningful interactions with him over the years, but his dog made them feel uneasy. Doucette described Tronco as not that angry of a character, but he's just an unapproachable character. Wooden fencing around the church property has been covered with messages in white paint. One said, "Why are you allowing your tax dollars to go for our death?" Doucette said with the standoff at the end, he hopes that the fencing and its messaging can be torn down. Giroux said it's a fear for safety all the time, especially with the dog, which they described as aggressive, forcing them to take extra steps to safeguard their own animals and loved ones. My sister and brother-in-law, they have 2 young boys, and they live downstairs. I'm worried about their safety. I'm worried about our safety. I'm worrying all of the time, she said. Doucette said that he hopes the neighborhood can begin to heal from the collective trauma, not just from the standoff, but from years of anxiety and worry. I like observation wheel planned for the falls. Niagara Parks features prominently in the province's new strategy. A second observation wheel is coming to Niagara Falls Tourist District. This one, according to a senior Niagara Parks official, resemble the world-famous London Eye along the River Thames in England. HOCO Limited has owned and operated Niagara Sky Wheel on Clifton Hill for nearly 20 years. Soaring 53 meters, it gives riders a panoramic view of Niagara Falls from the vantage of climate-controlled gondolas. Now, Niagara Parks is looking to the private sector to develop an observation wheel in nearby Queen Victoria Park. The 2 possible locations we've identified in the request for proposals document is the northwest and the southwest corner of the Niagara Parkway and Murray Street, said Niagara Parks Chief Executive Officer David Adams. The key part of the observation wheel would be to have a view of the falls, both the Horseshoe Falls and the American Falls, as well as the Niagara River. The procurement was announced when the provincial government launched its Destination Niagara strategy. Asked if he believes that the wheel would conflict with the existing Clifton Hill attraction, or if there's a need for 2 that close together, Adams said that the goal of this particular observation wheel would be to have a world-class design, take it to another level, so best in class, akin to the London Eye. He said the RFP is open until the end of May. We're looking for private sector innovation and private sector investment. No money is being put in either by Niagara Parks or the province of Ontario. Niagara Parks features prominently in the province's strategy designed to develop more demand-generating attractions that would double tourism visitation to Niagara. Niagara Parks has also launched procurements to redevelop the historic Ontario Power Company generating station to create a new guest experience and to revitalize the Niagara Parks Marina at Miller's Creek into a world-class recreation destination. The revitalization of the Toronto Power generating station into a 5-star boutique hotel is already underway, which followed the redevelopment of the Canadian Niagara Power Company generating station into a popular attraction. Adams said Niagara Parks has issued a request for interest for the Ontario Power Company station, which remains open until the end of February. Depending on what interest we receive, we anticipate issuing a request for proposals in the spring to then further advance that project. We're looking for ideas from the private sector as well as their investment, he said. Similar to the Toronto Power Project, the 4 key goals would be to see the restoration of the Heritage Building, creating a new visitor use, to pay Niagara Parks rent for use of the building through a long-term lease, and then to have a broader economic impact so that jobs were created during construction and jobs created when the new visitor use is open. Adams said the marina is also going through a 2-stage call for proposals. We've issued a request for qualifications, and then we anticipate a request for proposals after that, he said. We want to create a very special world-class tourism node on the South Niagara Parkway. That's the only marina on the Canadian side of the Upper Niagara River, so we have a need to revitalize the marina, open up much more public access to the water. During the province's Destination Niagara launch, it also announced that it's working on a new Niagara River Line attraction, which would be a fully accessible, all-season, automated electric tram running 3.8 kilometers through Queen Victoria Park. A news release issued by the province said that its suspended capsules would give visitors unmatched views of Niagara Falls while connecting them to major attractions across the area. Adam said that the concept came from an RFP Niagara Parks issued about 2 years ago for a new visitor transportation system. He said that the agency identified a successful proponent and plans to announce it in January or February. We have a signed letter of intent with that proponent, and we're now in the due diligence phase. Adams said that the visitor transportation system will facilitate connection within Queen Victoria Park. There would be 5 stations running from our Rapids View parking area over to Clifton Hill, so really connecting the key visitor experiences, he said. Adams said that the contract approval process with the province will be done in 2026, which will be followed with a construction schedule. It's a few years away, but in the meantime, we'll continue to operate the We Go buses in Queen Victoria Park, he said. Shaw Festival finds second home on Toronto waterfront. Theater partners with Harbourfront Centre on 3-year deal. Shaw Festival is launching a new era of storytelling on the shores of Lake Ontario after establishing a 3-year artistic residency at Toronto's Harbourfront Centre. The 3-year partnership will bring acclaimed Shaw productions, including the holiday staple A Christmas Carol, to Toronto audiences, transforming the city's lakeside into a permanent home for Shaw's dramatic arts through 2029. The announcement was made Sunday evening at the closing of the Royal George Theatre in Niagara-on-the-Lake, with the Shaw officially named Harbourfront Centre's resident artist company. Speaking before Shaw's final performance of A Christmas Carol, Harbourfront Centre CEO Kathy Loblaw welcomed Shaw Festival to its new Toronto home. She said that the residency will allow even more audiences and communities to experience the magic and the connectivity that is Shaw Theatre. It's a world-class theater on a level that everyone at Harbourfront across the city and the province are incredibly excited to see and experience during this 3-year term. From the beginning, when we were talking about the possibility, it was really the shared values that brought us together. Shared values of community, the role of theater, and connecting us as humans. And just the whole notion of curiosity and creativity and innovation. Both organizations, in a news release, said that the partnership strengthens their commitment to making the arts more accessible, connecting communities through creativity, and enriching Toronto's cultural landscape. Tim Carroll, Shaw's artistic director, said partnering with one of Canada's most vibrant and diverse arts destinations lets the Repertory Theatre Company, which is the second largest in North America behind Stratford Festival, share its magic with new audiences. At a time when audiences are longing for real human connection, we're proud to collaborate with Harbourfront Centre to bring our work to new communities and create spaces where creativity and curiosity can flourish, said Carroll in the release. As part of the residency that starts in 2026, Harbourfront Centre will present 3 Shaw Festival productions each year, scheduled from October through March at the Fleck at Harbourfront Centre Theatre. Harbourfront Centre is a recreational hub for more than 6.3 million visitors annually and champions established and emerging Canadian artists across disciplines. The Fleck, an indoor theater venue, has a capacity of about 350 people. At Harbourfront Centre, we believe in the power of the arts to connect and inspire, Loblaw said in the release. Welcoming the Shaw Festival as a resident artist company reflects our commitment to bring exceptional theater to the heart of our waterfront campus and creating meaningful cultural experiences for the diverse communities that we serve. Shows and ticket information will be announced in March. Shaw's Festival 2026 productions include Funny Girl, Sleuth, The Wind in the Willows, Jeeves and Wooster in Perfect Nonsense, Ohio State Murders, and Amadeus. Sunday evening marked the official closing of the Royal George Theatre. Earlier this year, Shaw announced a $35 million investment from the province of Ontario to support the rebuilding of the theatre, part of a larger rehabilitation project for the festival. Built during the First World War, the Royal George welcomes more than 100,000 visitors annually. It is, however, in urgent need of repairs. The goal of the rebuild, targeted to open in spring of 2029, is to modernize the space while preserving its historic charm, adding 20% more seating and improved accessibility. The new Royal George is expected to pay homage to a Georgian-style theater while meeting the needs, requirements, and values of a modern theater. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. EA, to be sentenced for intimate relations with a former student. A 49-year-old educational assistant at a Niagara elementary school who had an intimate relationship with a 14-year-old former student will learn her fate in the new year. Tracy Coleman had been employed at St. Mary Catholic Elementary School in Welland. The Port Colborne resident is to be sentenced in January on charges of sexual interference and making sexually explicit material available to a person under the age of 16. Parents everywhere put such great trust in teachers, Assistant Crown Attorney Jacqueline Skransky said Friday at a sentencing hearing in Ontario Court of Justice in St. Catharines. Teachers and educational assistants, next to parents, bear an enormous responsibility, and there's a huge trust in their relationship. Ms. Coleman allowed a huge boundary to be crossed here, and we're not talking about a one-time incident. In a victim impact statement read in court by the Crown, the teenage victim explained how the incident has impacted his life. "I want no contact with her ever," he wrote. "My anxiety is very bad. I find it hard to trust people." Sturkansky said Coleman committed an egregious breach of trust, which lasted for 3 months. Not only did she have a bond with him, but she had a bond with his family, she said. This wasn't just a nameless, faceless teacher at the school. This was someone who was actually part of the family group. Defense lawyer Vijay Singh said his client's conduct shattered her world, and she fully accepts responsibility for her actions. At the time of the offenses, he added, there were intimacy deficits stemming from disconnection from her husband brought about by the passage of time. Court was told a psychological assessment concluded that the woman is of low risk to reoffend. Coleman told the judge she is filled with remorse, regret, and shame. "It is something I wish I could change, that I could take back," she said. Detectives with the Niagara Regional Police Child Abuse Unit launched an investigation in June of 2024 into allegations of sexual assault involving an employee with Niagara Catholic District School Board. Coleman was arrested the following month. We need to understand that regardless of whether a victim participates or not, the case law is so clear, the Crown told Judge Deborah Calderwood, and it needs to be said over and over again, that when a child is participating in offenses like this, they are absolutely not responsible. So any sense of shame or humiliation that this young man feels, any anxiety that he feels, is not of his own making, because it is the adult that bears the responsibility of behaving inappropriately. In a statement released following Coleman's arrest, Niagara Catholic Education Director Camilio Capriano said that the employee has been placed on administrative leave. $2.1 million power of sale finalized for the Welland House property. Numbered company acquires site after it fell into bank ownership. The site of the former historic Welland House in St. Catharines has a new owner after being sold for $2.1 million under a power of sale. Property records show that the 0.85-acre vacant lot at 2630 Ontario Street was transferred from SBI Canada Bank to a numbered company 3 weeks after the lender took ownership. While corporate filings for 2839243 Ontario Incorporated list Gurpreet Das as the corporation's active director, the buyer's plans for the future of the site remain unclear. Avison Young Commercial Real Estate confirmed to the Standard in May that the property was marketed on an unpriced basis. In an email Friday, Andreas Vidris, Director of Media Relations, said that the firm did not have further details on the sale because it did not represent the buyer in the transaction. The property was listed on Realtor.ca for $1, though the asking price on the MLS site was $2.5 million. Earlier this fall, the former Welland House site listed SBI Canada Bank as the mortgage in possession on an MLS price sheet. The lender took control of the property due to a default on the mortgage. The bank took immediate possession on September 29th. The power of sale transaction to 2839243 Ontario Incorporated was finalized on October 20th. This is a legal process that allowed SBI Canada Bank to sell the property to recover outstanding debts after the previous owners defaulted. The downtown property, fronting Ontario King and William Streets, was home to the Welland House Hotel building before the vacant 5-story structure burned down on July 12, 2021. No cause was ever determined. The fire occurred hours before St. Catharines City Council was to designate the building under the Ontario Heritage Act. Council went ahead with the heritage designation, and the owners were required to salvage and store any materials that may have some heritage interest from the debris. On Friday, the City of St. Catharines said that its staff had not met with the new owner or had an opportunity to discuss any plans that they may have. It said while the city cannot speak to the redevelopment of the site, the goal in these cases is to try and encourage the incorporation of salvage materials, if possible. In an emailed statement, Mayor Matt Cisco said that the loss of the historic building was significant, and we recognize the community's interest in the future of this important gateway site to downtown. We're excited to work with the new owner to explore redevelopment opportunities that strengthen the downtown, respect the site's context, and deliver long-term economic and community benefits, said Cisco. Welland House was built in 1856 and was the last of 3 grand spa hotels in St. Catharines, which was known internationally for its spring healing waters and attracted high-profile guests. It functioned as a hotel until 1990 and was a student residence before being boarded up. It was sold to 227-2872 Ontario Incorporated in 2011. The lot has been vacant since the remains of the fire-ravaged building were cleaned up in 2023. Catherine Dodge, St. Catharines Downtown Association Executive Director, said that she was aware that there had been interest in activating the lot in the past, including ideas around interim or community-focused users, but was unaware of the sale or future plans for the site. It's always encouraging to see interest in development and investment in the downtown core. We have a unique urban center here in the heart of Niagara, close to the border and major markets, so continued interest is not surprising, she said. Dodd said the former site of the Welland House continues to be part of downtown conversations because of its history and what it represents within St. Catharines. The Welland House remains especially relevant in discussions about the history of downtown St. Catharines, including its connection to the city's black community, she said. We often hear from people who would like to see that history acknowledged in some way in the future. While the sale clears the way for redevelopment of the grounds, little is known about the corporation. A Ministry of Public and Business Service Delivery profile report said that 284-9243 Ontario Incorporated was incorporated on June 22, 2021, with a registered head office address in Oakville. Das is listed as the corporation's active director, president, treasurer, and secretary. The report said that the corporation does not have any active business names registered, nor does it have any expired or canceled business names registered under the Business Names Act in Ontario. The St. Catharines land is zoned for the downtown commercial core and has multiple permitted uses, including an apartment building, hotel, offices, restaurants or retail, a parking structure, long-term care facilities, theaters, university, and/or college, and more. Developers of former Parliament Oak property are fined by the town. Soil removed by Two Sisters Corporation and dumped at Glencairn Hall site. The owner of the former Parliament Oak school property violated the town's site alteration bylaw by moving soil from the King Street location to the Glencairn Hall property on Niagara River Parkway, town staff say. Mara Miner, the town's corporate communications lead, said in an emailed statement that the town issued an administrative monetary penalty system fine under the bylaw to the owner. In early November, trucks filled with soil from 325 King Street, where Two Sisters Corporation is building a 4-story, 5-star hotel, traveled to 14795 Niagara River Parkway, where the historic Glencairn Hall was located before the structure was destroyed in an April fire. Niagara-on-the-Lake's Heritage Committee and Town Council had agreed to a request from the owner to demolish the remnants of Glencairn Hall. Niagara Regional Police confirmed the case regarding the Glencairn fire remains open and under investigation. Miner said that the town issued orders under the town's bylaw, and the owner ceased all dumping of fill on the site. She said since no site alteration permit application was submitted to the town, the staff are unable to determine the total quantity of soil that was transferred from the 4-hectare location. A request for comment from Two Sisters Resort Corporation, owned by Niagara-on-the-Lake business person Benny Murata, which is constructing the hotel, was not returned. Tom Richardson, a lawyer at Sullivan Mahoney LLP, who had been representing Two Sisters Resort Corporation, said in an email response that he was no longer employed by the company. The town's bylaw, approved by council in 2005, prohibits the removal of topsoil on land or alter the grade of land or cause the grade to be altered within the town unless a permit has been issued. Contravening the bylaw includes stopping the soil from being dumped and or removing the dumped soil within 48 hours. Excess soil may be deposited at a reuse site provided that it follows Ontario regulations under the on-site and excess soil management, said Gary Wheeler, a spokesperson for the Ministry of Environment. Under the regulation, the soil must be used for a beneficial reuse, and the quality of the soil has to meet the excess soil standards for the reuse site, he said. The owner must ensure that the excess soil deposited does not cause adverse effect to human health or the environment, he said. Wheeler did not say whether a complaint was made to the ministry regarding the Parliament Oak soil dumping. The town issued 2 stop work orders in September for doing excavation work and removing soil without a permit. The town fined the company $500 a day for each day that the work took place. Town officials said a site permit application was submitted to the municipality on September 12th. The town staff said that they are continuing to monitor the construction site. Town officials took action after complaints were made about the activity at the Parliament Oak construction site. In a September 22nd letter to town officials, Bruce Murray of Murray & Associates, LLP, representing the Niagara Foundation, Friends of 1 Mile Creek, and Niagara-on-the-Lake Residents Association, said that they have been concerned about the removal of topsoil, the placing or dumping of fill, and the alteration of the grade of land within the entire town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Murray said there is a high probability nearby residents will experience an impact by any new water flow into the watercourse from Parliament Oak. Murray said in the letter that the organizations are more concerned about the impact the construction will have on stormwater and groundwater outflows from the site into 1 Mile Creek. Construction of the hotel involves building an underground parking structure to accommodate 248 parking areas. The organizations have called on the town to conduct a peer-reviewed engineering and hydrogeological report, and if one has been conducted, to release it to the public. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hoping for a white Christmas in Niagara? Keep dreaming. Anyone in Niagara hoping to wake up Thursday morning with a blanket of snow on the ground is likely to be disappointed. The forecast is not calling for a white Christmas, and it won't be a green one either. Gerald Chang, a meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, said daytime highs are expected to remain above freezing this week, meaning what you see on the ground Christmas morning won't be a frosty white scene. Rather, it'll be what's on the ground today, which he would not describe as the green we get in the spring and summer months. I would even say brown, he said, because it's not completely green either. Chad said that there is some chance of a trace amount of snow Monday night, but not enough to accumulate. Green or brown Christmases have been something of a regular occurrence in Niagara. While the area had a white Christmas morning last year, over the previous decade there were 4 years with significant snow on the ground. However, while lack of snow might be good news for travelers on Thursday, those out and about on Boxing Day will need to be careful. Chang said that there's a possibility of a system moving into the region, bringing ice pellets and freezing rain. I think that'll be the system to watch this week, he said. This article is from the opinion page. Clearing 2 levels of security in the University of Oxford's Weston Library, I felt like I was about to see something very few people ever do. When the red-bounded book was finally placed in my hands on that afternoon in May, the head librarian gave me explicit instructions. I was to sit in the front row in his clear line of sight. No photos, no talking. My friend and I were baffled by the strictness. When we asked why, the librarian referenced the author's newly elevated public profile, the dynamic advantage of competition, Prime Minister Mark J. Carney's 1995 DPhil thesis at Oxford University. In my hands were 287 pages of economics written in UK English. Why bring up Oxford DPhils and spelling conventions? Because Canada is experiencing a quiet but revealing spelling scandal, as reported by The Guardian. 6 experts, 5 linguists, and a representative editors of Canada recently wrote a letter to the Prime Minister demanding that the Government of Canada and Parliament must continue to use Canadian English spelling. They objected to the appearance of UK English spelling, such as utilization with an S, globalization with an S, and catalyze with an S in recent government documents, including the federal budget, arguing that those choices are damaging our identity and confusing Canadians. At first glance, the whole thing sounds like a clever joke. Canada is grappling with trade wars, an affordability crisis, housing shortages, pipeline disputes, economic instability, and a declining population. And linguists are debating whether the Prime Minister's spelling is sufficiently maple-infused. But look beneath the surface and the question becomes more interesting. What is Canadian English anyway? Our national variety of English is neither fixed nor apolitical. It is a hybrid of UK English and US English, shaped by colonization, with a Z, nation building, and long-standing economic and cultural proximity to the United States. Canadian English has always evolved with the times. Even the linguists acknowledge that spelling has shifted through waves of immigration and incorporate words and expressions with indigenous languages. Seen this way, Carney's spelling choices are not merely stylistic, they reflect a broader moment of realignment. As Canada navigates trade disputes, economic nationalism, and growing unease about U.S. dominance, even small linguistic markers begin to signal questions of alliance and orientation. In a trade war context, the difference between IZE and ISE can read as symbolic rather than trivial. The debate also surfaces something Canadians have been oddly reluctant to discuss since Carney took office. He is, by education and work experience, deeply shaped by the UK Canada, has elected an Oxford educated Prime Minister who, in 2013, became the first non-British citizen to govern the Bank of England in its more than 300-year history. The spelling controversy raises uncomfortable questions about who gets to define Canadian language and identity. Yet it is worth remembering that part of Carney's appeal during the election was precisely his time outside Canada and the international experience that he brings back with him. So next time you find yourself hesitating between standardized with an S or standardized with a Z, you might also ask a bigger question. Where do we want our alliances to lie? If spelling with an S feels Canadian, and it happens to mildly irritate Washington in the age of tariffs, well, then there are worse ways to make a point. This was written by Yvonne Sue, who's an associate professor in the Department of Equity Studies at York University and a research fellow at the University of Oxford. This opinion op-ed is entitled Why Trump Yields to Putin. The Russian word državnost is usually translated as great power status, but the real meaning is closer to the gangland concept of respect. The word was beyond the reach of my feeble Russian vocabulary until I heard it about 20 times in 20 minutes while interviewing an ultra-nationalist ideologue called Alexander Drugin about 20 years ago. He was then popularly known as Putin's brain, to provide philosophical justifications for what the Russian dictator wanted to do anyway, not to give him policy guidance. Dugin is still around, although he's probably no longer in close touch with Vladimir Putin. But he's still in play, and in an interview with CNN last March, he claimed that Donald Trump's America has a lot more in common with Putin's Russia than most people think. The followers of Trump will understand much better what Russia is, who Putin is, and the motivations of our politics. Well, yes, of course. As the Kremlin spokesperson said of Trump's new national security strategy, the adjustments that we see correspond in many ways to our vision. That vision is a deeply traditional version of nationalism, which includes the conviction that the great powers have the right to command all the others. Trump's new national security doctrine states that the United States aims to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. It is not a word of criticism about Russia's wars in Europe, from Georgia in 2008 down to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. In this vision, the world is to be divided up between the two spheres of influence of the great powers, Russia, America, and China. Maybe with a share for India too, if it can get rich enough fast enough. It's an arbitrary and non-negotiable as the partition of Africa between the European great powers in the 1880s, only this time on a global scale. Maybe all this time we have been looking in the wrong place for an answer to the question, why does Trump always yield to Putin? Maybe Putin has no incriminating information about Trump's sexual or financial peccadillos, nor component of any sort. Perhaps the answer is simply that the two men have identical 19th century views about how the world should work at a time when almost everybody else sees it differently. The belief that all the states that belong to the United Nations are sovereign and inviolable has reigned since 1945. It has led to a stabilization of borders and an absence of global wars for 8 full decades. Neither Putin nor Trump accept that rule. Putin has already violated it by invading countries around its borders that used to be part of the Russian Empire. Trump is newer to this game but it's already attacked Middle Eastern targets and may be working up to a full-scale attack on Venezuela. Most other countries still cling to the old rules because that's their main protection against violation by one or more of the great powers. And crucially, the two other major concentrations of wealth and military power in the world, the European Union and China, still support the rule of law, at least in principle. The fate of the long peace will be decided by the choices that these two centers make. Europe knows it should defend its international law, but is as divided internally as the Holy Roman Empire, which had 27 sovereign states. China has mostly observed the rules in the past, but now has an alliance with Russia and a president for life whose future choices are imponderable. We are where we are, and it's not a particularly good place to be. However, the numbers are definitely on the side of those who do not want to return to the lawless past, and both Trump and Putin are mortal men. It will take at least several years yet to learn the outcome. This was written by Gwyn Dyer, and he's a London-based independent journalist. When should kids get a smartphone? The United States study links regular use before age 12 to actual health risks. Rand Barzilay, a psychiatrist and researcher at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, won't be letting his 9-year-old son get a smartphone before age 13. He made the decision based on data from his recent study, published in the medical journal Pediatrics, which linked getting a smartphone at a young age to worse health consequences. Kids who owned a smartphone by age 12 had a greater risk of depression, obesity, and insufficient sleep compared with those who didn't. A research team led by Barzilay found. That was based on observational data collected between 2016 and 2022 in an ongoing study of more than 10,000 children across the U.S. Designed to assess brain development and child health, the nationwide Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study has been following children for the past decade, starting from ages 9 to 10 into early adulthood. The age at which kids got a phone in this cohort ranged from 4 to 13, with a median age of 11. We're not advocating for people to go back to the Stone Age. We know that eventually almost every teen will get their smartphone, said Barzilay, the study's lead author. Smartphone ownership is high among U.S. children and teens. Nearly 60% of parents of an 11 or 12-year-old said that their child owned one in a 2025 Pew Research Center survey. By comparison, 29% of kids ages 8 to 10 and 12% of 5 to 7-year-olds had smartphones, the survey found. Concern about the impacts of mobile devices comes as rates of depression, suicidal thoughts, and anxiety have been rising among U.S. youth over the last decade. Though screens are unlikely to be the only factor, many studies have linked excessive use to worse mental health. That's not to say smartphones don't have benefits. The devices can help youth stay connected with people and address safety concerns that the parents may have. We're not saying smartphones are bad, but we're not saying they're good, Barzilay said. To him, the takeaway is that parents should consider how giving a child a smartphone could impact their child's health. Make sure that it doesn't consume all of their life, he said. Barzilay's team first compared the health outcomes of children in the study who owned a smartphone by age 12 and those who didn't. Those who had the device had a 31% greater risk of depression, a 40% greater risk of obesity, and a 62% greater risk of insufficient sleep, which in this case meant getting less than 9 hours of sleep. They next found that there was a roughly 10% increase in the odds of obesity and insufficient sleep at age 12 for each year younger than 12 that the child received a smartphone. Earlier age of ownership, however, was not associated with a higher risk of depression. A limitation of the study is that the researchers did not have data on what children were doing on their smartphones. They could not account for whether the child was exposed to adverse content on their device or what they tended to use it for. His team's last analysis zeroed in on the children who did not already have a smartphone at age 12. A year later, at age 13, roughly half of the kids in that group had received one. That came with a higher risk of having mental health problems and insufficient sleep compared with the half who did not receive a smartphone. His team controlled for factors such as income, parental education level, puberty, parental monitoring, and whether the kids had tablets, laptops, or a smartwatch that might affect the outcomes. However, other factors not captured by the research, which relied on observational data, still may have contributed to the outcomes identified. It's important to keep in mind that those findings speak to broad trends seen in the population and wouldn't predict a specific child's outcome. We need to remember that this is on average. It doesn't say anything for the individual child. His oldest two children, who are now in high school, received their first phones before age 12. If parents give their child a smartphone, they should check in regularly to see how it impacts the child's lifestyle. Screen time shouldn't come at the expense of sleep, physical activity, or quality time with friends and family. Bosley also suggested having the child keep their smartphone out of their bedroom at night and having tech-free family time, such as during dinner. Ultimately, he would encourage parents to make an informed decision on smartphone ownership for their child based on the evidence out there on the harms and benefits. Things that can help families delay the use of phones will probably make sense, he said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Ontario may alter teacher certification. Shortening teachers' college, expanding classroom hours are among considerations to ease the shortage. Changes to how new teachers in Ontario are certified are set to be announced next year and will entail a larger practical component, the education minister is signaling. In a year-end interview with the Canadian Press, Education Minister Paul Corandra said that he's looking at shortening the length of teachers' college and has been looking over teacher supply and demand numbers. Either way, I will say this. The one thing that we keep hearing over and over and over again is that prospective teachers, student teachers, need to spend more time in front of a classroom before they get out into a classroom full time, he said. We'll be in a position early in the new year to help people better understand where we're going on the teacher certification. But suffice it to say, more time in front of a class will be an element of it. Ministry Education documents obtained earlier this year by the Canadian Press through a Freedom of Information request showed that the province has been looking at how other jurisdictions certify teachers, and findings no longer programs do not make better teachers were highlighted. Real in-class experience, however, does appear to make a difference, according to the research the ministry compiled, with teachers who complete longer practicums more likely to stay in the profession. It also noted that Ontario is among the shortest practicum lengths for teachers, at 80 days. In 4 provinces and territories, including Ontario, they are between 8 and 12 weeks, while in the rest of the country the length is between 14 and 24 weeks. Teachers' college programs have generally been 2 years long for the past decade. In 2015, the then Liberal government doubled the length of the program during teacher surplus. At that time, there was a nearly 40% unemployment rate for teachers in the first year after becoming certified. Making the programs 2 years long caused admission rates to plummet, and there have been calls from teachers and principals groups to return to a 1-year program in the face of teacher shortages. The Ontario Principals Council and the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario are among the groups that have called for a return to 1-year programs. David Maston, president of ETFO, said that the ministry should be focusing more on retention instead of recruitment, pointing to data from the Ontario Teachers Federation that suggests that there are tens of thousands of teachers who are certified but not currently working in the province education system. It's tough working conditions. There's violence. There's a lack of respect. There's a lack of supports for students that this group of people care so deeply about, and they're leaving the profession. Postal Union to vote on a deal in the new year. Canada Post and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers say that they have reached tentative agreements. The deals announced Monday cover both the urban postal operations and rural and suburban mail carriers bargaining units. CUPW's National Board is recommending that members accept the deals during ratification votes set to be held in early 2026. Canada Post said the agreements include a 6.5% wage increase in the first year, followed by a 3% hike in the second year, and increases matching the annual inflation rate in the years 3 through 5. They also include enhanced benefits and a weekend parcel delivery model. The union and Crown Corporation said that they've agreed strike or lockout action will not take place during the ratification process. If the agreements are finalized, it would cap off more than 2 years of labor strife between the ailing Crown Corporation and its largest union, which represent about 55,000 workers. Kearney Newsmaker of the Year encapsulates the swings that we've seen across the political landscape this year. This time last year, the average Canadian might have struggled to pick Mark Carney's face out of a crowd. Now he's among the most recognizable figures in the country and was selected the Canadian Press Newsmaker of the Year for 2025 in an annual survey of newsroom editors and leaders from across the country. The vote wasn't even close. Carney was picked by 72 of the 95 respondents. A year ago, we knew Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was the next prime minister and the trade war was theoretical, said Bronwyn Bairstow, editor of Coast Reporter in Czech, BC. Mark Carney's ascension encapsulates the swings that we've seen across the political landscape this year. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's January announcement that he was going to resign set the stage for Carney's rise to the Prime Minister's office. It's difficult to pick out a major Canadian news story since Carney's victory in the Liberal leadership race that doesn't involve him in some way. His elbows up message in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war and threats of annexation became the central theme of an election campaign that had been shaping up to be about affordability in the Liberal record. Mark Carney did what Pierre Poilievre failed to recognize, seize an opportunity to capitalize on Donald Trump's aggressive stance toward Canada, said Don Walton, managing editor of CTV News Calgary. While the Conservative leader headed into a federal election remaining fixated on the Trudeau-era affordability issue, the newly minted Liberal leader correctly read the Canadian mood on 51st state and U.S. tariffs. Those trade negotiations are set to remain a major story in 2026 after Trump abruptly ended the last round of talks because he was offended by an anti-tariff TV ad paid for by the Ontario government. The Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement on Free Trade, or CUSMA, will enter its mandatory review period next year. Once in office, Carney launched a global charm offensive in an attempt to diversify Canadian trade away from the U.S. His efforts included reopening trade conversation with China and India, two countries that Canada had strained relations with under Trudeau. Domestically, Carney has pushed for faster approval of industrial projects through the Major Projects Office, but has faced criticism from the opposition Conservatives over a lack of projects, especially pipelines, receiving the federal green light. On that front, Carney signed a memorandum of understanding with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith last month that clears a path to increased oil production and a new pipeline to the BC coast. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., star first baseman for the Toronto Blue Jays, came in a distant second place in the Canadian Press Newsmaker survey with 8 votes. Being a huge Blue Jays fan, I almost wanted to vote for Vladdy, but there hasn't been a day gone by that Mark Carney isn't in the news cycle, good or bad, said David Curtin, host of Meeting Ground on 650 CKOM in Saskatoon. The Blue Jays' pennant run captured the country's imagination and united people behind the team's first World Series appearance since their championship win in 1993. Striking workers came in third place in the survey after a year of high-profile labor disputes involving Air Canada, flight attendants, Alberta teachers, and postal workers. Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Alberta's Danielle Smith rounded out the top five, respectively, as the high-profile premiers frequently entered the national conversation. Data shows 2025 was tough for U.S. travel. Return trips by Canadians dropped 30% in September. Carol Nash loves her American family. It's just their president she's not fond of. My identity as a Canadian was threatened by his desire to absorb us, said the Ontario resident of Donald Trump's threats to make Canada the 51st state. Despite the warm welcome of my family in the States, I won't be going down to visit. Nash is one of many Canadians dedicated to an indefinite boycott of the U.S., citing the haughty rhetoric of the U.S. president, aggressive tariffs, and expanding growing ideological differences. The travel sector is one of many casualties of the fallout between the once friendly countries, as the number of Canadians traveling south of the border continues to plummet, while U.S. travel policy grows increasingly difficult for outsiders to navigate. The latest data from Statistics Canada showed that U.S. travel by Canadians continued to decline in the month of September. Return trips from the U.S. by Canadians residents dropped 30.9% year over year, including a 33.8% dip in those returning by car and a 19.3% decrease in air travel. The year has not been good for the Americans regarding tourism, says Frederic Demanche, a professor in the Department of Hospitality and Tourism at Toronto Metropolitan University. And it's not just Canadians taking a pass on the U.S. A fall report from the U.S. Travel Association expects a significant drop in global tourists to the U.S. by the end of the year, the first decline since the pandemic. The organization projects international visits to the U.S. to dip to 67.9 million in 2025, which is a 6.3% decrease from the 72.4 million visits in 2024. Demanche stressed that while the impact to the overall U.S. economy might be small, specific states like Florida, New York, Nevada, and some border states are feeling the pinch disproportionately. Even snowbirds, the most predictable migrators to the south, are cooling on warm weather U.S. destinations. According to Canadian travel resource Snowbird Advisor, fewer self-identified snowbirds will flock to the U.S. this winter compared to a year ago. The survey of 4,000 Canadian snowbirds found that 70% plan to visit the U.S., down from 82% last year. At least 30% own property in their destinations. Said Fine of the survey respondents, you're not just going to let it sit empty for the year and pay to go somewhere else or stay at home. Other warm weather destinations are pouncing on America's diplomatic missteps. Demanche said places like Mexico, Costa Rica, and Portugal are becoming more popular with Canadians. Nash says that her American cousin is planning a trip to see her in Canada, and she's keen to explore more of her own country. You've been listening to reading of articles and features from current issues of the Niagara Falls Review. We read from the Niagara Falls Review every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Jeff Shapiro. Thank you for listening.